Alaska is beautiful, but its small towns hide something terrifying. In the frozen silence, people vanish, shadows linger, and some secrets are never unearthed. These are the 10 most disturbing true Alaskan small-town horror stories. Subscribe to Moonlit Fears, and step into the darkness. The town of Whittier, Alaska is like no other. Tucked away along Prince William Sound, it is a place of perpetual isolation. The mountains encase it like walls, and the only way in is through a 2.5-mile-long tunnel, dark, dripping, and suffocating. Once inside, Whittier feels less like a town and more like a forgotten outpost. Nearly all of its residents live in a single looming structure, the Bugich Towers, a Cold War relic that has become both shelter and prison for its people. In the harsh winter, the outside world disappears, snow buries the mountains, fog cloaks the sound, and the town falls into silence. The nights stretch endlessly, and the cold gnaws at everything, even the mind. It is in this silence that the story of the Whittier vanishing begins. For years, whispers spread among residents, odd noises in the hallways of Bugich Towers, when the storms pressed hardest against the windows, shadows drifting in stairwells where no one lived, and a suffocating sense that someone or something watched from the building's upper floors. Children spoke of hearing footsteps pacing above their rooms long after the tower's top levels had been abandoned. Parents dismissed it as imagination, yet even they admitted to strange occurrences. Doors unlocking by themselves, hall lights flickering violently during calm nights, and the overwhelming feeling of being observed. Then came the winter of the storm season was brutal, even by Alaskan standards. Blizzards sealed the tunnel, trapping Whittier from the rest of the state. Days blurred into nights, and survival depended on rationed food and heat. It was during this time that an entire family, 3 people, vanished from the tower without a trace. The Carsons were not outsiders. They had lived in Whittier for over a decade, known for their quiet lifestyle and steady presence. But one morning, their door was found wide open, snow blown into the hallway. Inside, the apartment was empty. No signs of struggle, no signs of forced entry. Only the faintest trace of something wet staining the carpet water, though its source was never found. Residents whispered about the sea, about the way the tides sometimes reached beneath the building, about voices that could be heard in the howling winds at night, and about the cold that seemed to seep into places untouched by the storm. Search parties combed the building, room by room, every stairwell, every abandoned unit, every basement corridor. But the Carsons were gone. Some swore that in the nights that followed, they heard 3 sets of footsteps in the halls, slow, deliberate, dragging. Others claimed to see faces pressed against the frosted glass of the lobby doors, staring in from the storm, though no footprints marked the snow outside. The official reports called it inconclusive. Investigators blamed the weather, suggesting that the family had tried to leave through the tunnel during the storm, perished, and were buried by snow. But the people of Whittier knew better. They had felt the building change. They had felt its hunger. And for years after, no one lived in the Carsons' unit. The Carson family's disappearance left Whittier scarred. But it also birthed something far more dangerous: silence. A silence that spread through the Bugich Towers like frost through glass. Neighbors stopped speaking of it openly. When children whispered about seeing shapes in the stairwells, they were hushed immediately. When someone heard slow knocking at their door past midnight and opened it to find nothing but frozen air, they quietly turned their locks and told no one. The fear of acknowledging it seemed greater than the fear itself. But the building remembered. In the weeks after the family vanished, strange phenomena grew bolder. Residents reported waking up to find their furniture moved, chairs stacked in unnatural formations, photographs flipped face down. A woman swore her reflection lagged behind her in the bathroom mirror, staring a moment too long before it blinked. Another claimed that her son had been speaking to a man in the hallway, though no such man existed. The hallways themselves began to feel wrong. Long stretches of fluorescent lights flickered endlessly, plunging residents into pockets of darkness. Elevators shuddered between floors, opening into abandoned corridors that no one had entered in decades. Some described hearing the sound of rushing water within the walls, though no pipes ran there. The echoes came at night, rising and falling like a tide, as if the ocean itself was breathing through the building. It was during one of those long storm-choked nights that another resident disappeared. a man named Ellis, who lived 2 floors above the Carsons' abandoned unit. He was seen heading toward the laundry room late in the evening, muttering about finishing chores before power outages cut the night short. He never returned. His laundry basket was found inside the room, clothes half folded, the fluorescent bulb above buzzing faintly, and on the tiled floor was a trail of water that led directly to the back wall where the concrete was dry, unbroken and sealed since the tower's construction. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the sea itself had reached into the tower to take it. Others whispered that the Carsons were not gone at all but had become part of the building, pulling others into whatever void had claimed them. The rational voices dwindled. Even skeptics found themselves locking doors earlier, double-checking windows, and leaving hall lights on through the night. By spring, when the tunnel reopened and supplies reached Whittier, investigators returned to probe the town again. They cataloged Ellis as missing, added his name to the Carsons, and left. For the rest of Alaska, it was another strange, isolated tragedy in a forgotten port town. For Whittier, it was an open wound. To this day, many locals insist there are places in baggage towers where you should never linger. A certain stairwell where whispers echo, though no one is there. A hallway on the 9th floor where the air is unnaturally damp, even in the driest winter. And the Carson family's old apartment, door now bolted shut, though residents swear they hear footsteps inside when the wind howls through the tunnel. The building watches, it waits, and every few years, someone new disappears, claimed not by the storm, not by the sea, but by something that refuses to let go of Whittier's frozen heart. For those who live there, survival is not just about enduring the endless winters. It is about ignoring the whispers that crawl through the concrete walls and praying the tower never decides to notice you. Nome, Alaska. A windswept coastal town pressed against the edge of the Bering Sea, a place of gold rush legends and endless icy horizons. On the surface, it is a rugged community defined by endurance. But beneath its veneer of survival lies a far older, more unsettling mystery. For decades, the people of Nome have spoken of lights, flickering orbs that drift across the tundra at night. They are not the shimmering auroras that dance in green curtains overhead, nor the headlights of distant vehicles. These are something else, bright, pulsing spheres of pale fire that appear on the outskirts of town, hovering silently over the frozen earth, before vanishing as suddenly as they came. Locals gave them many names: ghost lights, spirit lanterns, eyes of the tundra. To the indigenous Inupiat, they were omens, harbingers of loss. Hunters told stories of chasing caribou across the snow, only to see those lights and find themselves disoriented, circling back in confusion, prey long gone. Families warned their children, if you follow the lights, you may never return. Most brushed it aside as superstition, but in the winter of 2005, Nome learned how real those warnings could be. That year, the town was buried in relentless storms. Blizzards sealed the roads, flights were grounded, and for weeks, Nome became an island of snow and silence. During one such storm, a young nurse named Andrea went missing. She had been walking home from the hospital late at night, bundled against the wind, when she vanished into the whiteout only blocks from her apartment. Her footprints trailed into the snow but ended abruptly, as though she had stepped into thin air. Search parties combed the streets, then the tundra, scouring every frozen ditch and wind-carved drift. Days later, her body was never found. What rescuers did find were reports, disturbing, consistent reports, of strange lights flickering in the storm on the night she vanished. Dozens of residents claimed they saw them, bobbing faintly in the distance, glowing through the curtain of snow. Some said the lights seemed to move deliberately, circling the town as if watching, waiting. Andrea was only the beginning. Over the next 3 winters, a pattern emerged. Residents would go missing. Hunters, travelers, even locals just walking home after dark, and each time someone would swear they had seen the lights, always on the edge of vision, always pulling their gaze into the tundra. By 2009, the disappearances had gained national attention. Rumors spread wildly: alien abductions, government experiments, or something even older, something born from the land itself. Skeptics mocked the stories, attributing them to disorientation, hypothermia, or hallucinations caused by the endless Arctic night. But those who lived in Nome knew better. The lights were not imagined. They were patient, deliberate, and terrifyingly real. The fear grew so strong that residents began avoiding the tundra after sunset. Hunters left offerings on the outskirts of town: tobacco, food, coins, to appease whatever lurked within the darkness, and in hushed voices, the elders of Nome admitted what few dared to say aloud, that the lights were not just omens. They were predators. And predators, once they find a place to hunt, never leave. The fear in Nome became impossible to ignore. Between 1960 and 2004, dozens of people had mysteriously disappeared from the small town and its surrounding wilderness. Hunters, travelers, and even longtime residents, vanishing without a trace. So many, in fact, that the FBI was eventually called to investigate. Official reports concluded that the cases were the result of alcohol, cold exposure, or the unforgiving elements of rural Alaska. Logical explanations, neat enough to close the files. But Nome's people knew better. The stories of the phantom lights had grown louder, more urgent. Witnesses swore they had seen them drifting closer to the town itself, no longer confined to the tundra. The lights hovered by the edges of streets, floating above frozen alleys, darting between snowbanks with an unnatural fluidity. Some nights, they seemed almost to press against the windows of homes, glowing faintly against the glass, as though peering inside. It was during one of those winters that a man named Jacob, a seasoned musher, vanished. He was no stranger to the dangers of the Alaskan night. He had survived storms, frostbite, and the biting cruelty of the wilderness. But one February evening, he left with his sled dogs and never returned. When search teams followed his trail, they found it veering off course, drawn toward the open tundra. His dogs, exhausted and trembling, were discovered days later, tied to a post, unharmed but restless, as though terrified of something unseen. Jacob himself was gone. Locals whispered that the lights had taken him. The survivors of Nome began to describe an unsettling common thread. Those who had seen the lights up close, too close, spoke of an overwhelming pull, a compulsion to follow. Their movements were hypnotic, swaying slowly at first, then darting just out of reach, like a lure cast into the dark. One man compared it to the feeling of drowning, the way the lights seemed to drag his thoughts downward, pulling him deeper into their glow until all sense of direction dissolved. He only survived because his wife screamed his name, shattering the trance, dragging him back from the snow's edge. But not everyone was called back. To this day, the missing of Nome remain a haunting number, their stories unfinished. The FBI's explanations never satisfied the people who lived with the lights, who heard the whispers carried on the wind, who saw the glow lingering just beyond the edge of town. Even now, in the quiet hours of the long winter nights, Nome's residents claim the lights still return, hovering above the frozen tundra, moving closer, waiting, and though no one dares admit it openly, there are those who believe the lights are not random at all. They are hunting, patiently, purposefully, selecting their prey one by one, until the snow itself remembers the names of the lost. The auroras may dance across the Alaskan sky, beautiful and eternal, but beneath them, on the frozen ground of Nome, another kind of light moves, silent, cold, and merciless. And when it finds you, there is no warmth, only the darkness that follows. There are places in Alaska where time has stopped, where the wind rattles through empty windows, and the silence is broken only by the groan of decaying wood. One such place is Kennecott, a remote mining town nestled deep within the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains. To reach it, you follow a narrow gravel road that winds for miles through wilderness, until the world around you feels utterly deserted. And then in the distance, the silhouette rises, massive red buildings clinging to the mountainside, as though they themselves are holding on to life. Kennecott was once a monument to ambition. In the early 1900s, it thrived as a copper mine pulling untold riches from the earth. Miners carved through rock and ice, living in cramped shacks, laboring day and night. The company built mills, hospitals, bunkhouses, An empire of timber and iron in a place where winters could kill as easily as the mine shafts themselves. But for all its success, Kennecott carried a shadow. Men died here, many in ways that defied explanation. Some were crushed in cave-ins, their bodies never retrieved, left entombed in the mountain itself. Others fell sick with sudden wasting illnesses that left them pale, hollow-eyed, coughing blood until their lungs collapsed. And then there were those who simply vanished. A miner would walk into the shafts with his lantern, the echo of his boots trailing into the dark, and he would never walk out again. No body, no trace, only the faint smell of smoke and the distant clatter of tools where no one was working. The townspeople spoke in hushed tones about the mine being cursed. The copper was too pure, too perfect, as though the mountain had not wanted to give it up. They said the earth had taken its revenge, not in sudden bursts, but in slow, patient thefts of human life. When the last of the copper veins dried up in the 1930s, the company pulled out overnight, leaving Kennecott frozen in time. Homes were abandoned with furniture still inside. Hospital beds were left made, waiting for patients who would never return. The towering 14-story mill still looms, a skeletal relic that seems ready to collapse at any moment, yet refuses to fall. And though the miners left, something else did not. Visitors who brave the long trek to Kennecott today often describe the same sensation the moment they arrive. The crushing weight of being watched. The mountains are vast, the valley open, yet somehow the air feels stifling, thick with a presence that lingers in every shadow. Some hikers claim they've heard voices drifting from the empty mill, faint as whispers carried by the wind. Others say they've seen lantern lights flickering inside, moving slowly from window to window even though no one was there. One explorer swore he found fresh footprints in the snow leading into the mine shaft. They were deep, heavy impressions, but when he followed them inside, they stopped abruptly, as if the person had vanished into thin air. He didn't stay to see if the prints might return. The locals who know of Kennecott call them the Red Shadows, dark figures outlined by a faint crimson glow, glimpsed only in the corners of your vision. They vanish the moment you turn your head, yet leave behind a crawling dread as though they are standing just behind you. Some believe they are the ghosts of the miners, trapped in the very ore they bled for. Others think they are something older, something that was buried in the mountain long before men ever carved into it. And as the years pass, Kennecott does not crumble into dust the way other ghost towns do. It endures, its mill clinging to the mountainside, its windows black and hollow, its presence oppressive, almost as if the town itself refuses to be forgotten. But perhaps it refuses to let go. The deeper you explore Kennecott, the more the silence becomes unbearable. Every sound feels amplified, the crunch of gravel beneath your boots, the low groan of rusting beams straining in the wind, the hollow echo when you step inside the massive red mill. Yet behind those sounds, there's something else, a subtle rhythm, a faint, dragging noise that doesn't belong to you, that never quite matches your steps. Explorers have reported hearing the clang of metal deep inside the ruins, like pickaxes striking rock, but the mines have been sealed for decades. No one should be working in those shafts, and yet the sound repeats, steady, deliberate, echoing in the belly of the mountain. Park rangers who patrol the area tell their own story. One ranger sent to check the stability of the structures claimed he saw movement in one of the upper windows of the mill, a shadow leaning against the frame watching him. When he climbed the interior stairs to investigate, he found the floor coated in thick dust. No footprint, no sign that anyone had been there. Yet when he turned to leave, he heard a low cough behind him, a rasping, wet cough, the sound of a miner choking on blood. Others describe an unnatural chill that clings to the hospital building. Even in summer, its halls remain icy. The operating tables are still there, the instruments rusted with age, but some visitors insist they've seen them gleam as though freshly used. The sharp scent of antiseptic lingers in the air, mixed with something coppery, something like old blood. And then there are the encounters with the Red Shadows, They are always at the edges, standing in the doorway when you enter a room, lingering at the far end of a hallway, flickering in the windows at night. Their glow dim, but unmistakable. Some explorers have captured strange lights in photographs. Red smears across the image, forming the outline of tall human-like figures. In one case, an urban explorer swore he felt a hand grip his shoulder while taking pictures inside the mill. When he spun around, no one was there, but his camera caught a faint outline in the dark, a silhouette with eyes glowing faintly red. The most unsettling reports come from those who stay after sunset. Kennecott is a place where daylight feels fragile, where the mountains cast long shadows even in the brightest hours. But at night the town transforms, the air grows heavy, and the silence deepens into something predatory. People claim to hear the creak of boots on staircases, the shuffle of unseen bodies moving through the halls, and always the glow, red lights drifting between the windows, pulsing faintly like lanterns carried by miners who never return. One hiker told of waking in his tent nearby, startled by the sound of voices outside. He swore he heard men arguing, their words garbled but urgent, as though fighting over something. When he peeked outside, he saw dozens of dim red glows moving through the ruins of the mill. They spread slowly, circling the structure, until the entire building looked alive with crimson shadows. He didn't wait to see what happened next. He ran through the night until he reached his car, too terrified to look back. Locals believe the copper itself holds the spirit, that the ore absorbed the suffering, the greed and the deaths of those who mined it. The mountain, they say, is cursed, and Kennecott is its monument. The town is not merely abandoned, it is claimed, and when you leave, the dread doesn't. Some visitors have confessed to feeling followed long after returning home. They catch glimpses of a red figure standing in their yard, reflected in their windows, or watching from the edge of the street. As though once you've seen Kennecott, once you've looked upon its ruins, the shadows do not forget you. To this day, Kennecott endures, rotting but unbroken, its mill towering defiantly over the valley. It is a place of wealth and ruin, of ambition and death, a ghost town that refuses to die, because something within it won't let it. Something that waits, something that remembers, something that watches, still from the shadows stained. On the southern coast of Alaska lies a place that the maps still remember, but time itself has almost erased. Portlock, also known as Port Chatham. Once it was a small fishing village, carved against the edge of wilderness where the sea met the shadow of endless forests. The villagers were hardy, their lives built on salmon runs and the treacherous waters that surrounded them. But today, Portlock stands silent, abandoned, and consumed by the weight of something darker than the storms that batter its coast. The story of Portlock is not one of slow decline. It is one of terror so profound that the entire town, men, women, children, walked away and never came back. It began with the fishermen, strong men, skilled and fearless, who knew the ocean's moods and the dangers of its waves. Yet, one by one, they vanished. Some went out to sea and were never seen again, their boats drifting back empty, nets torn to shreds. Others went into the forest for hunting and never returned. The search parties found no bodies, no blood, only gear abandoned as though its owner had simply dissolved into the air, and when bodies did surface, they were not whole. Limbs torn, torsos shredded, as if ripped apart by something far stronger than any animal known in those woods. The elders whispered of a monstrous presence, something that stalked both land and sea, but the villagers had no name for it, only the fear of it. Soon, the town was plagued by more than disappearances. At night, hunters claimed they heard heavy footsteps echoing through the forest, pacing the edge of camp, just beyond the glow of the fire. Nets left on the shore would be ripped open by dawn, as though clawed apart, and the fishermen's cabins bore strange marks, carved deep into the wood. Gouges too high for a bear, too deliberate for any wild beast. The fear grew unbearable. Men began refusing to fish the waters. Women barred their children from leaving the cabins, and every night the town seemed to shrink inward, pressed down by the weight of something unseen. But Portlock was not abandoned yet. Not until the killings began. Fishermen who dared to brave the ocean were found washed ashore, their bodies mangled beyond recognition, ribs crushed like twigs, faces frozen in terror. A hunter was discovered hanging upside down in a tree, his torso ripped open, entrails draped across the branches like macabre ornaments. Others were dragged into the sea, their screams echoing into the night until swallowed by the waves. The villagers knew then that something was hunting them, something massive, intelligent, and merciless. Some said it was not an animal at all but a being from legend. The Nantinaq, a creature like a towering man but covered in hair, with strength enough to crush bone in its hands. The stories claimed it was older than the forests themselves, a spirit of wrath that rose when men trespassed too far into its domain. And Portlock had done just that, carved their homes into the wilderness, fished its waters until they bled, and acted as though the land belonged to them. But in Alaska, the land belongs to something older, something that remembers every trespass, something that takes back what it is owed. Portlock did not fall to famine, nor disease, nor the cruelty of nature. It fell to fear. By the 1950s, the town was empty. Its people fled, leaving homes, boats, and belongings behind. They never returned. To this day, the ruins of Portlock still sit at the edge of the sea, houses collapsing into moss, docks crumbling into water, and silence pressing against every wall. But silence does not mean peace. For those who have visited since, the stories are always the same. Heavy footsteps in the forest, guttural growls that shake the night, and the sense overwhelming and suffocating that you are being hunted. And sometimes on the shoreline, they say you can see enormous footprints, stamped deep into the sand. Footprints that lead into the forest and never come out. The wilderness never gave Portlock back. Decades passed after the Exodus, and the village began to rot, its cabins swallowed by moss and sea spray. But though the people left, the terror did not. Travelers, hunters, and curious explorers who stepped onto its shores all tell the same story. Portlock is not empty, it is waiting. In the 1970s, a small group of hunters ventured near the ruins, hoping to camp for a week in the area. They had heard the stories, but dismissed them as legends, superstitions born from isolation. On the first night, they heard it, a deep, resonant thud, like footsteps too heavy for any man. The sound moved along the tree line, circling the camp slowly, deliberately. The hunters raised their rifles, but the night swallowed everything. Then came the stench, an overpowering musk, like wet fur rotting in the heat. One of the men swore he saw glowing eyes staring from the dark, set too high above the ground to belong to a wolf. By dawn, the hunters left. They never stayed to test their courage again. Others were not so fortunate. Fishermen passing the coast claimed to have seen massive shapes moving along the beach, hunched and broad-shouldered, vanishing into the forest when spotted. A group of loggers reported tools going missing, only to find them twisted, bent in half as though snapped by impossible strength. And hikers who dared to stay overnight in the ruins described being woken by the sound of guttural growls. So close, they felt the vibrations ripple through the ground beneath their sleeping bags. But perhaps the most chilling stories are the ones tied to footprint. Gigantic impressions, nearly twice the size of a man's boot, pressed deep into the sand and mud, perfectly shaped, unmistakable. Some led down to the shoreline before vanishing into the wave. Others cut into the forest, following no trail, no path, as though belonging to something that does not need them. And on one occasion, a team of researchers recorded a set of tracks that stopped suddenly in the middle of a clearing. Not a gradual fade, not eroded by weather, just gone, as if whatever made them had stepped out of existence. The native Alutiiq people had warned of such things long before the settlers came. They spoke of the Nantinaq, not merely an animal, but a spirit, a creature of wrath and vengeance. It did not simply kill, it punished. It stalked those who disrespected the land, and it made examples of them. Portlock, they say, became its feeding ground. Some believe the townsfolk never truly escaped, that the reason no bodies were ever buried, no graves ever marked, is because the Nantinaq took them whole, dragging them into the endless wilds where no one could follow. That the village was not abandoned out of choice, but because its people were claimed. Even now, visitors tell of feeling a crushing weight when they step into Portlock. Not the natural fear of wilderness, but a presence, an intelligence that watches. They describe hearing their names whispered in the forest, though no one else is there. Others recount seeing shapes moving in the corner of their vision, tall and broad, vanishing the moment they turn their head. The ruins remain as a warning, roofs collapsing, docks dissolving into sea, the church bell rusted and silent. Yet, beneath the decay there is a sense of something preserved, something waiting to stir. Because Portlock is not just a town swallowed by time, it is a graveyard without bodies, a place abandoned, yet still alive with the echo of screams. And the footsteps in the forest have never stopped.
There is no town in Alaska quite like Whittier, tucked against the edge of Prince William Sound, surrounded by mountains that seem to cage it in. Whittier exists in a place where nature dictates every movement. Wind tears across the shoreline with the sound of a train barreling through a tunnel, snow piles thick enough to swallow cars whole, and for long stretches of the year, daylight feels like a fleeting dream. But it isn't the weather that makes Whittier strange. It is the way its people live. Nearly every resident of Whittier, from fishermen to shop owners, from children to the elderly, lives inside a single massive concrete structure, Begich Towers. Once a military barracks built during the Cold War, the building rises like a gray monolith against the frozen landscape. Its narrow windows stare out across the Sound and up into the towering cliffs, 100 eyes watching the endless night. Inside, its hallways stretch long and sterile, echoing with footsteps, the hum of pipes and the distant murmur of lives pressed too close together. Life in Whittier is claustrophobic. There are no winding neighborhoods, no scattered homes, no sense of distance between lives. Everyone breathes the same recycled air, walks the same dim corridors, and shares the same heavy silence that seems to seep from the walls themselves. For outsiders, stepping into Begich Towers is unsettling, as if you have entered a world where privacy does not exist and escape is a luxury few can afford. And yet, the real unease begins when the night settles in. From the windows of Begich Towers, residents often report strange lights drifting across the mountains and low over the black surface of the water. Some claim the lights are nothing more than aircraft or reflections from distant vessels. But those who have watched them closely know better. The lights move too silently, too deliberately. They appear without warning, hovering in the distance like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Then, slowly, they draw closer, pulsing with an eerie rhythm as though calling out, beckoning. The town whispers that those who follow the lights do not return. Old stories tell of fishermen stepping out to sea after glimpsing them, rowing into the Sound until their boats were swallowed by mist and never seen again. Hikers lured into the mountains vanish, as if the cliffs themselves consumed them. The lights are not constant. They appear in cycles, weeks apart, sometimes longer. But when they come, they bring a weight to the air, a silence that presses against the chest, as though the entire town is holding its breath. And then there is the building itself. Inside Begich Towers, the atmosphere grows heavier at night. Residents speak of long hallways that seem to stretch farther than they should, of doors that rattle with knocks though no one stands outside, and of shadows lingering at the far end of the corridor that vanish when approached. The pipes groan and the walls sigh as if the building itself is restless, never fully asleep. One account tells of a resident who left his apartment after hearing a faint tapping sound. He followed it down the hall into the stairwell and then into the laundry room. The sound grew louder, sharper, almost rhythmic. But when he opened the door, the room was empty, except for a single window left open to the storm. The next morning he was gone, his apartment locked from the inside, his belongings untouched. He was never seen again. In Whittier, disappearances are rarely spoken of aloud, but they are not forgotten. Some vanish outside, swallowed by the lights over the sea. Others vanish inside, claimed by something that walks the same corridors as the living. And in the middle of it all, the tower stands silent, a gray fortress, a sanctuary for some, a tomb for others. Whittier exists as though suspended between two worlds, the storm-lashed wilderness outside, and the haunted quiet within, but both share the same truth. When the night falls, you are never truly alone. The deeper one looks into Whittier's history, the more the lines blur between natural danger and something far more sinister. On the surface, this is a place where storms swallow ships, avalanches bury trails, and isolation itself can drive the mind into madness. But what truly chills those who know the town best are the disappearances. They happen quietly, without spectacle, as though the night itself simply erases the living. One winter, a man was last seen standing at the window of his Begich Towers apartment. He told his neighbor he was watching the lights again, drifting low across the sound. Hours later, his apartment was found empty. The lock was still fastened from the inside. The window, however, was wide open, icy wind clawing its way into the room. On the sill, faint smears of frost and something darker remained, as though a hand had gripped the edge before letting go. His body was never recovered. Another story tells of a young woman who worked in one of the small shops on the ground floor of the tower. She often closed late, the last person walking through the fluorescent-lit hallways. One night, she never made it home. When her co-workers searched, they found her belongings neatly left in the shop. The security cameras in the hall showed her locking the door, turning to walk toward the elevators, and then nothing. She never appeared again. The footage carried on, the hallway empty. It was as if she simply vanished between. The whispers in Whittier claim the lights outside are not separate from the shadows within. Some believe the building itself is a vessel, a conduit, that holds more than just the lift. The old military history of Begich Towers fuels the theories, rumors of experiments, underground tunnels, and things that were never meant to see daylight. No records confirm these claims, but the silence of official reports only deepens the suspicion. Residents who have lived in the tower long enough know the feeling of being watched. Late at night, when the storm beats against the concrete walls and the hallways fall silent, footsteps echo, slow, deliberate, heavy enough to resonate through the floor. When one dares to look, the corridor is empty, except for a faint shimmer at the end, as though the air itself bends around something unseen. Some believe those who vanish are not truly gone, but absorbed. Their essence lingers in the tower, repeating small fragments of their final moment. A fisherman's boots dragging across the hallway tile, a child's laughter, echoing faintly in the stairwell, the sound of someone knocking, softly, at doors that should remain closed. And always, outside the windows, the lights. There are stories of people waking in the middle of the night, to find their entire apartment bathed in a dim glow. Though no light source exists, their curtains sway as if caught in a breeze. Their breath fogs though the room is sealed. Looking outside, the lights hang motionless, waiting. Some claim the glow forms shapes human figures, standing in rows along the shoreline staring up at the tower, patient and silent. The people of Whittier rarely speak openly about these things. Perhaps it is fear of ridicule, or perhaps it is the unspoken understanding that acknowledgement gives the darkness power. But those who have left the town behind carry the same haunted look when asked about their time there. Their eyes shift to the floor, their voice drops, and they insist, Whittier is not a place for the living. In the end, Whittier feels less like a town and more like a trap, its residents confined inside a concrete husk, surrounded by wilderness that hungers, watched over by lights that lure, and stalked by shadows that do not belong to the living. Whether it is the land itself, the weight of isolation, or something older and darker feeding on the town, one thing is certain: in Whittier, when the night falls, walls cannot protect you. They only keep you inside with whatever else shares the hall.
Nome, Alaska, a windswept town pressed against the Bering Sea, where icy waves crash endlessly against the shore and winter storms howl like ancient beasts. It is a place that feels cut off from the world, reachable only by air or by sea during the brief summer. To many, Nome is a frontier town, a land of gold rush legends, of frozen tundra, of dog sleds racing across the snow. But beneath the stories of grit and survival lies a truth darker than the cold itself. Nome is not just haunted by its past. It is haunted by its dead. For decades, the town has been scarred by the unexplained vanishings of men and women who simply disappeared from its streets. Locals whisper of the Nome missing, a grim pattern of residents and visitors vanishing, often during the depths of winter, when snow buries the land and the aurora flickers above like a curtain between worlds. Some of these people were never seen again. Others were found frozen in positions too unnatural to be explained away by frostbite or exposure. One story tells of a man discovered just outside of town, standing upright in the snow as if he had been frozen solid in the middle of walking. His face was contorted in terror, his eyes wide and glassy, his mouth frozen open as if screaming at something unseen. His body was so rigid that the rescuers had to chip the ice away from his boots before he could be removed. No tracks led to him, no sign of struggle. He was simply there, like a statue left by something that wanted him found. Nome's cemetery is unlike most. The permafrost makes digging graves difficult and winter makes it nearly impossible. The result is rows of wooden crosses tilted at strange angles, markers leaning precariously as if the earth itself resists holding the dead. The wind sweeps across the graves constantly, whistling through broken fences and rattling old, weathered boards. At night, those who pass near the cemetery report hearing the sounds of footsteps crunching in the snow behind them. But when they turn, the expanse is empty. And then there are the lights. Much like Whittier, Nome has its own spectral glow. But here, they do not hover far away. They appear close, just at the edges of town, weaving between the buildings, ducking into alleys, sometimes lingering outside bedroom windows. Those who wake to see them swear the lights do not illuminate the snow. Instead, they cast shadows, dark, human-shaped silhouettes that flicker and vanish when looked at directly. Some believe these are the spirits of those who vanished, trying to find their way home. Others believe they are something far older, creatures of the tundra that wear the faces of the missing to lure new souls into the ice. The disappearances became so frequent that rumors spread of government involvement. Conspiracies suggest abductions, secret tests, or military projects hidden beneath the frozen ground. But locals dismiss those explanations. To them, the truth is simpler and far more terrifying. Nome is cursed, a place where the dead walk in silence, where the frozen earth keeps secrets it will never release, and where something unseen hunts beneath the northern lights. Travelers who come to Nome for work or adventure are often warned by the locals with a single phrase: do not walk alone at night. It is not superstition, but survival. For in Nome, the night belongs to something else. And once it notices you, the snow may become your grave. As the years dragged on, the mystery of Nome only deepened. The disappearances began to take on a strange pattern, one that locals quietly tracked even as officials offered only silence. Nearly every winter, when the nights were longest and the wind tore across the frozen tundra, someone would vanish, not just one or two, but in clusters, as if the darkness swallowed them in waves. The official explanations were predictable: alcohol exposure, disorientation in the snow. Outsiders were told that the brutal climate was to blame, that people wandered out of town in drunken stupors and froze before they could find their way back. But those who lived there knew better. These were not accidents. The vanished left behind too many odd details. Doors left wide open in sub-zero temperatures. Footprints that began in the middle of town but ended abruptly at the edge of the tundra. Cars found idling with headlights on but no driver in sight. And then there were the bodies. One was discovered half buried in ice, her face turned toward the sky as though she had been staring at something above her when death came. Her eyes had frozen open, and though frost clung to her lashes, her expression was one of paralyzing horror. No signs of struggle, no wound, just fear captured and preserved in the endless cold. Another was found inside an abandoned shack near the water's edge. The man had clearly broken in for shelter, his hands wrapped in torn fabric as if he had tried to ward off the cold. But when rescuers pried open the door, they found his body curled in a corner, not frozen in the typical stiffness of hypothermia, but bent unnaturally, limbs twisted as if he had been contorted by something unseen. Around him, etched into the frost on the wooden walls, were strange markings, shapes and lines that seemed to writhe in the candlelight, symbols no one could identify. Nome's cemetery became the heart of the town's unease. Strange lights often drifted between the leaning crosses at night, weaving slowly through the graves like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Hunters claimed to see figures standing among the graves, still and silent, watching as if keeping count of the living. Some swore they recognized the faces of the vanished, staring back at them with hollow, frozen eyes. Locals began to tell stories of whispers that carried on the wind, soft voices calling out names in the dead of night. The sound would rise from the cemetery, winding its way through town, rattling window panes and slipping beneath locked doors. To hear your name was considered a death sentence. It meant the frozen ground had already chosen you. There are tales of travelers who stayed in Nome for work, ignoring the warnings of the locals, men who mocked the idea of spirits, who laughed at the notion of cursed snow. But when winter fell, they too vanished, some in their sleep, some walking into the darkness without explanation. Their bodies never recovered. Even now, Nome carries its reputation like a wound. Those who live there rarely speak of the disappearances openly, but their silence speaks louder than any words. It is the silence of people who know they live beside something they cannot fight, something that watches, waits, and claims its victims without warning. Nome is not a town of myth. It is a graveyard disguised as a community. The land itself feels hungry, the wind carrying more than just snow, the night sky shimmering with lights that do not belong to the heaven. And when the winter deepens, when the aurora dances over the frozen sea, Nome becomes what it has always been, a place where the living vanish. The dead wander and the earth itself refuses to give back what it takes. Barrow, Alaska, known now as Utquagazvik, sits at the very edge of the world. A town caught between endless tundra and the frozen sea, where the sun vanishes for more than 60 days each winter. Darkness swallows everything, an ocean of shadow pressing against every cabin, every empty road, every drifting plume of snow. In such a place, the human spirit clings to warmth and familiarity. But in Barrow, even those fragile comforts could not protect them from what the long night brought. It began with the lights. At first, they were dismissed as auroras, green ribbons drifting across the night sky, pulsing like living veins. But these lights were different. They did not hang far above the earth. They came close. They flickered just beyond the houses, slithering between snowbanks, rolling like liquid fire along the frozen horizon. And with them came unease. Dogs refused to go outside when the lights appeared. Radios sputtered with static. Hunters swore they saw figures standing in the glow, tall, thin shapes that bent at unnatural angles, waiting in the silence. The first to vanish was a hunter named Samuel. His snow machine was found idling by the edge of the tundra, headlights glowing against the snow. The tracks showed he had walked away straight into the darkness. His rifle was strapped to the sled, untouched. No body was ever recovered. People whispered he had followed the lights, that they had called him. Weeks later, a woman was seen leaving her cabin in the middle of the night. Her neighbors tried to stop her, but she tore free with a strength unnatural for her frail body. She walked barefoot into the snow, her thin nightgown snapping in the wind. She never looked back. They said her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting something not of this world. By morning she was gone, her footprints swallowed by drifting snow. The vanishings multiplied. A family disappeared from their home. The doors left wide open, stew still simmering on the stove. Search parties combed the tundra, but every trail ended the same way. Prints stretching into the darkness, cut short as if the person had stepped into thin air. Some claimed to see lights dancing far out in the snow, weaving in and out like phantom lanterns. No one dared follow. Fear hollowed out the town. Streets emptied after dusk. Children slept huddled beside their parents, blankets piled high against the biting cold. Yet the lights did not leave them alone. They drifted closer, slipping between houses, painting pale glow across windows, seeping through curtains. Some swore they heard voices with the glow, whispers urging them outside, promising warmth, peace, or reunion with lost loved ones. Others claimed to hear only laughter, hollow, endless laughter rolling across the tundra. The Tone Council pleaded for outside help. Investigators arrived with cameras, thermal scanners, and the arrogance of those who thought themselves immune to folklore. They mocked the elders, insisting the vanishings were explained by exhaustion, disorientation, or suicide in the endless dark. But on their third night, they too disappeared. Their snow machines were found the next morning, engines still running, headlights cutting across the ice. The men were gone. Their radios buzzed with static for days before falling silent. The disappearances no longer felt random. They felt deliberate, like harvest. The elders whispered an old belief, that there were things in the tundra older than mankind, spirits that fed during the long night when the sun abandoned the world. The lights, they said, were not auroras at all, but lures, bait cast into the darkness. Each time someone followed, each time someone vanished, the glow multiplied. The darkness was feeding. By January, the town lived in terror. No one left their homes after sundown. Windows were blacked out, candles snuffed early, prayers whispered into silence. Still, the lights pressed closer. Sometimes they flickered inside homes, crawling across walls, hovering at the edge of vision. People claimed to wake with frost on their skin, with whispers still echoing in their ears. A few woke to find their doors unlocked, even when they swore they had sealed them tight. The long night dragged on, and Barrow became a place of whispered countdowns. Neighbors asking not if someone would vanish, but who would be next. For every disappearance, the glow outside grew stronger, weaving over the tundra like veins of fire. And then, without warning, the sun returned. Light cracked across the horizon, painting the snow in blinding white. The lights vanished. The whispers fell silent. Life crept back into the streets. Families embraced. Survivors pretended to smile. But relief did not erase the truth. Too many were gone. Too many tracks ended in nothing. The long night had taken what it wanted, and it would return to take more. The sun, in all its brilliance, felt fragile like a candle in a storm. Everyone in Barrow knew what lay ahead. In a matter of months, the daylight would fade again. The endless night would return, and when it did, the lights would be waiting. Whittier, Alaska, is unlike any other town. Tucked at the edge of Prince William Sound, surrounded by mountains and glaciers, it is a place cut off from the world by land, sea, and snow. Fewer than 300 people live there, and almost all of them share the same roof. The Beach Towers, a looming Cold War-era building that functions as apartments, police station, school, post office, and grocery store. Life in Whittier feels contained, as though the entire town breathes beneath concrete walls. Safety in isolation, some would say, but in isolation something else festers. For decades, whispers have circulated about what lies beneath Whittier. Old tunnels carved through the mountains, abandoned military bunkers from the 1940s, concrete labyrinths designed to withstand bombs but left to rot in silence. The tunnels are sealed, they say, the bunkers empty. But in Whittier, people tell a different story, that the tunnels are not silent at all. It begins with the screams. Residents speak of nights when the wind dies down, when the sea is calm, and yet faint echoes rise through the ground. Screams, raw human screams trailing up from beneath the building's foundations. Sometimes they sound distant, other times just below the floor, as though someone is trapped within the walls. Children were the first to notice. In the 1970s, kids playing in the stairwells claimed to hear crying between the pipes. Some swore a woman's voice called their names from the basement. At night, tenants reported footsteps in the hallways long after curfew. When they opened their doors, the corridor was empty, yet the sound of pacing continued, slow, dragging, deliberate. The screams came in waves. For weeks at a time, silent. Then suddenly, nights filled with muffled sobs, frantic pounding against unseen doors, desperate pleas echoing in the concrete. Some believed it was the mountain itself shifting. Wind funneled strangely through the tunnels. But others knew better. They claimed the voices were not just screams, but words, whispered threats, names spoken aloud, promises of suffering. One maintenance worker in the 80s followed the sound down into the basement, past the old boiler rooms. He never returned. His flashlight was found at the foot of a sealed door. The bulb still warm, the batteries drained. The door itself was marked with scratches. Not from tools but from fingernails. Ragged lines etched deep into the steel. After that, the basement was locked. But locks meant little. Tenants continued to hear the noises, sometimes from the pipes, sometimes from beneath their beds. One family fled in the middle of the night after their young daughter woke screaming that a man was standing at the foot of her bed, his face covered in frost, his mouth opening far too wide. She swore he whispered to her, "The door is open now." Stranger still were the disappearances. A fisherman visiting relatives vanished from the towers one winter night. Security cameras showed him entering the basement, but none showed him leaving. The footage cut to static for nearly 3 minutes, then returned, showing only an empty hallway. His body was never recovered. Others spoke of encounters near the mountain tunnel, the single road that connects Whittier to the outside world. Travelers waiting at night claimed to see pale figures watching them from the darkness of the tunnel, vanishing when headlights swept over. One truck driver swore he struck something crossing the road, something large, with limbs too long for a human, but when he stepped out to check, the asphalt was bare. No blood, no body, only long wet handprints smeared across his trailer, leading downward toward the mountain. Theories spread like wildfire. Some said the military had conducted experiments in those bunkers, projects buried when the base was abandoned. Others believed the tunnels connected to older forgotten passages carved by something far more ancient than mankind. The sea, the mountain, the darkness. It had been feeding long before Whittier ever existed. By the late 1990s, investigators tried to debunk the legends. A group of urban explorers forced their way into the sealed bunkers. Only one returned. He refused to speak of what he saw, but his friends claimed that when they reached a vast underground chamber, the screaming stopped. Silence pressed against their ears, then a door slammed behind them, though no one had touched it. In the dark, something moved. A figure crawling on the ceiling, its limbs bending like broken branches. They ran, but only one reached daylight. The others were never found. To this day, residents of Whittier continue to hear the voice. They echo in the stairwells, bleed through the plumbing, rise from the frozen ground beneath their feet. Some nights the screams are so loud that people gather in the hallways, clinging to one another as the sound vibrates through the wall. And though the official records list no deaths, no hauntings, no supernatural events, those who live there know otherwise. They live above something alive, something restless, something waiting. The Buggetch Towers is more than a home. It is a coffin nailed shut against the darkness below, and every scream that rises reminds the people of Whittier of one terrifying truth: coffins do not stay closed forever. Nome, Alaska, a small coastal town perched on the edge of the Bering Sea, famous for its gold rush past and the annual Iditarod sled dog race. On the surface, it seems like a rugged outpost of adventure, where explorers and prospectors once carved lives from ice and stone. But Nome hides a legacy much darker than lost fortunes or frozen winters. For decades, it has been a place of disappearances. Between the 1960s and early 2000s, more than 24 people vanished from Nome without explanation. Most were indigenous Alaskans, last seen leaving a bar, walking home, or simply stepping outside into the endless dark of the Arctic night. Their bodies were rarely recovered. When they were, the condition of the remains raised more questions than answers. Frozen in unnatural positions, limbs broken at odd angles, eyes missing though no animal tracks were ever found. Officials blamed alcohol, hypothermia, and the unforgiving wilderness. The cold could kill a man within minutes, they said. A stumble into the snow after drinking could be fatal, but the families knew better. The disappearances followed patterns, and the survivors, who returned few as they were, spoke of things far stranger than frostbite. One man, a hunter named Thomas, vanished for 3 days. When he stumbled back into town, his face was burned with frost, his clothes torn. He could not explain where he had been, only that he remembered the lights. He described them as orbs hovering in the sky, moving silently above the tundra. Then came the figures, tall, thin, with elongated arms and faces too pale, too featureless to be human. He claimed they whispered in a language that seemed to vibrate inside his skull, commanding him to follow. When townspeople pressed for more, Thomas began to scream. His body convulsed. His nose bled, he collapsed in the snow and died before sunrise. The autopsy revealed no natural cause. His brain, however, bore small, unexplained scars, burns on the tissue as though something had seared him from within. The FBI was called in during the late 1990s. They quietly investigated, combing through records, interviewing survivors. Yet no public explanation ever came. The case files remained sealed. Officials announced only that the majority of deaths could be linked to alcohol and exposure. But the people of Nome knew the truth had been buried. The vanishings continued. Pilots reported strange lights above the coast, flickering like fireflies but too controlled, too precise. Hunters spoke of strange humming noises in the tundra, low vibrations that made the earth tremble. Dogs refused to go near certain stretches of land, growling at the empty sky. And then there were the abductions. Families whispered about loved ones taken from their beds, doors locked from the inside, windows still sealed by ice, only the blankets rumpled, the pillows empty. Some spoke of strange burns left on the wooden floors, small perfect circles as though something had hovered just above, searing the ground before vanishing into the night. One woman, Anna, claimed her brother was taken in front of her. She described a blinding white light flooding the cabin, paralyzing her in place. She could not move, could not scream. She watched helplessly as her brother rose into the air, lifted by something unseen, his body rigid and eyes wide with terror. The light vanished. He was gone, and for the rest of her life, Anna swore she could still hear his muffled cries in her dreams. By the 2000s, Nome's reputation had grown. Some blamed serial killers, others government cover-ups. But the indigenous elders of the region offered another explanation, older, darker. They spoke of the Takriakswit, shadow people said to dwell between worlds, spirits that could mimic human voices, lure travelers into the night, and steal their souls before returning their empty shells to the snow. To the elders, the lights in the sky were not machines but omens. The eyes of the shadow people watching, hunting. Still, whispers spread of more tangible horrors. Airmen stationed nearby spoke of the hangar, a sealed building near the old military airstrip. Rumors claimed the FBI and military conducted experiments inside, studying the missing, dissecting bodies that had been returned, searching for answers they never revealed. One worker swore he heard screams coming from within, human yet warped, echoing through the steel. He quit the next day and never returned. The disappearances slowed after 2010, but they never stopped. Nome still loses people. Travelers vanish on short walks between bars and hotels. Hunters step off familiar trails and are never seen again. Pilots still report strange lights dancing above the tundra, and fishermen tell of voices carried over the waves calling them by name, luring them farther from shore. No single explanation fits. Some insist it is the wilderness itself, a merciless land that swallows the careless whole. Others cling to the stories of alien abductions, shadow people, or government cover-ups. But one thing remains constant: the silence that follows. Families receive no answers, only condolences. The sea keeps its secrets. The tundra swallows its dead. Nome stands as a reminder that Alaska is more than just snow and survival. It is a frontier, where the unknown still lingers, where the night sky hides eyes that are not stars, where footsteps in the snow may lead, not to safety but to disappear. The people of Nome live with the truth carved into their bones in this frozen land. The most terrifying predator is not the cold, nor the wilderness, but something that watches from the dark and takes, without ever giving back. There is a place in Alaska that no map will show you. A place whispered about by hunters, dismissed by officials, and buried under decades of silence. Locals call it Erkinik, a name that means the swallowed one, not because the land was swallowed by the ice, but because the people were. The story begins in the early 1900s, when prospectors pushed deeper into Alaska's wilderness. Desperate for gold, furs, and oil, Along a frozen riverbank, they built a small settlement of cabins, saloons, and a trading post. It thrived for a short while, pulling in wanderers from the edges of the frontier. By 1910, more than 200 people lived there, and then they vanished. No war, no fire, no epidemic. One winter, mail carriers found the town deserted, food left on tables, lanterns still filled with oil, sled dogs still chained and starving. There were no footprints in the snow, no signs of struggle, no bodies, just silence. The town was abandoned overnight, as though every man, woman, and child had walked into the woods and never returned. Authorities chalked it up to a migration, settlers deciding to leave behind the unforgiving land. But locals knew better. The land itself was cursed. Hunters swore the river near the town froze faster than any other, as if something beneath was pulling the cold upward. They heard voices drifting across the snow at night, calling them by name, and those who followed the voices never came back. For decades, Erkinik remained a story, a ghost tale passed from generation to generation, until the 1950s when surveyors stumbled upon its ruins. Beneath the collapsed cabins, they found tunnels carved into the permafrost, narrow, winding passages that should not have been there. No records ever mentioned mining shafts. No prospector would have dug so deep, so far from gold. The tunnels were lined not with wood, but with strange black stones, smooth and polished, as if shaped by hands long before the settlement was founded. The men who went inside reported hearing things, low hums, vibrating in their chests, whispers in a language they could not understand, and shadows that did not belong to them, flickering at the edges of their lantern light. Most of them left, shaken, but a few returned weeks later changed. Their eyes sunken, their skin pale, as if frostbitten from within. They spoke little, but when they did, it was in that same alien language. One of them took his own life. The others simply wandered into the snow and disappeared. After that, the government sealed the ruins. They declared it unstable, unsafe. The official records mention only abandoned mining infrastructure, but pilots flying overhead still report strange patterns etched into the snow, perfect circles that appear overnight and vanish the next day. Hunters say the air grows heavy near the river, as though the land itself is breathing, and those who camp too close sometimes do not wake up at all. In recent years, a group of urban explorers from Anchorage sought the truth. They recorded their journey into the remains of Erkinik with handheld cameras, uploading short clips online before vanishing. The last video is only a few minutes long. It shows them deep underground, the walls of the tunnel glistening as though wet with ice. One of them whispers, "Do you hear that?" And faintly in the background there is a sound, not the wind, not dripping water, but a chorus of voices, chanting, overlapping, louder and louder, until the camera shakes and the footage cuts to black. None of them were ever found. To this day, no one knows what swallowed the town. Was it the land itself, hungering for souls? Was it something older, lurking beneath the permafrost, reaching upward through whispers and shadows? Or was it a doorway, an opening into another world, one not meant for human eyes? All that remains are ruins buried under snow, guarded by silence, avoided even by the bravest hunters. The town has been forgotten, erased from maps, erased from memory, but the ice never forgets. It keeps what it takes. And in Alaska, where the night stretches for months and the wilderness has no mercy, there are places even darker than the forests, colder than the tundra, and far more dangerous than the sea. Places like Erkinik, places where entire towns can vanish, and places where, if you listen closely, you may still hear the voices of the swallowed ones calling, always calling for more. The night is long in Alaska, but some shadows stretch even longer. From the frozen streets of forgotten towns to the endless forests where no footsteps return. These stories remind us that not every place welcomes the living. Some towns are left behind for a reason. Some whispers in the snow should never be followed. And some horrors are carved so deep into the land that time itself cannot erase them. You've walked through the frozen wilderness. You've stood in the empty streets. You've heard the voices that still echo through Alaska's forgotten towns. The question is, will you ever sleep the same again? This has been Moonlit Fears. If the darkness hasn't claimed you yet, subscribe and step with us into the shadows once more. Because in every corner of the world, there are stories like these, and we are only just beginning.